What's up, guys? We all know there's a tech shortage. How do we fix that? Apprenticeship is a huge part of bringing new people into this. Whether it's an apprentice out of a trade school, out of high school, there has to be an influx of new blood. How do you train them? There are plenty of resources for online seminar-based learning. Scanner Danner is our go-to, and Mr. Danner is amazing. His material is simple, it's incredibly effective, and it's pretty widely applicable. These are all the things you look for in training, right? So when you are training somebody, you do want to give them material like that, but you also need to have them doing practical things. To do practical work on a vehicle, whether it's testing, repairs, it's a flat repair, an oil change, a check engine light evaluation, there have to be realistic expectations. There has to be a balance there. You can't expect an apprentice to go into a check engine light and figure it out in anything that would strike a seasoned tech as a reasonable amount of time. Each step you're going to have to explain. You're going to have to walk them through it. What is our methodology for working through it? I took my job as a mentor to teach methodology and process. It's the most important part. It's the core of everything we do is process and methodology. What is our process for checking in a vehicle? What is our process for courtesy evaluation, a peace of mind evaluation to a vehicle? Building a test plan, a brake evaluation. Consistency is going to breed results. It's going to breed accuracy. When things become instinctual, you don't have to think about it and you can focus your thought on something that is not a common task. You can focus on improving common tasks, consistent documentation, consistent work through a ticket or through a line on a ticket. If you have an oil change, you do the same thing every time. I pull a car in, pop the hood, first thing that happens, key comes out, windows down, oil cap goes on the hood latch, so I cannot close that hood without putting the oil cap on. Rack gets set, I do my testing, I check my oil level beforehand, put it up, I work through my process. My process has been all of my processes, the ways I work through cars, have been crafted over years of experience, years of doing this. How do you teach someone that? Does my process work for everybody else? Probably not. A lot of people see my process and go, what the hell just happened? And that's, I think, I watch some of my guys work and go, Jesus, really? Everybody's going to work through and develop their own processes. They have to be given the freedom to do that, but they also have to be given the knowledge to understand what each step in the process is, what it means, and that only comes through allowing them to develop those processes under supervision so they're not making mistakes and screwing things up. They're ticking all the boxes, but developing a consistent process and methodology for every task, no matter how menial it seems, is going to make things flow consistently. And consistency breeds comfort. Comfort breeds speed. It also breeds confidence. It's way more important than comfort. Too much comfort is a bad thing. There's also got to be variation in the work they're doing. You can't give a guy oil changes for his entire career and expect him to be happy. There's got to be more tools going in the toolbox. Like any toolbox, you have your foundational tools, your sockets, your wrenches. When you're training, you need to give that apprentice the foundational toolbox of process methodology. What is the research process? What is the training process? What does everything has a process. Whether we acknowledge it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, there's a consistent process that builds over time, figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work. Apprentices need to make mistakes. That needs to be a realistic expectation. They are going to screw up. Everyone's okay with it until it's an expensive screw up that they're paying for. Then a lot of things become not okay, and that's not okay. There are going to be mistakes made. The job of the mentor, on top of helping build processes and build research skills, things like that, is allowing those mistakes to be made to a point. As a mentor, sometimes you have to step in and say, no, this is not the right way to do it. This is a really good way to make an expensive mistake. Try this instead. Or this is our goal. Where do we go from here? We've got to be able to figure out what that balancing act is, letting mistakes happen, but not letting too many mistakes happen. A failure of an apprentice to learn, in my opinion, is a failure of the mentor to properly train. And that's where I feel like I let my guys down that I was training. We did the sit downs every week. They were assigned a Scanner Danner video usually. Other times we would use other resources, but they were assigned a video. They would watch it. They would take notes, write down questions, whatever it was. And then we'd go through and we would discuss what they watched, what they took away, what they weren't clear on, and we would work through it. And we would spend as much time as we needed to on every single question until everybody was clear on it. If one of my guys had a question, chances are more than one of them had that question. And if not, cool. I would let them answer questions all the time. If something needed to be corrected, it was corrected. This all comes down to another fundamental of training is communication. There has to be open, honest, and clear communication. I'm not going to say it's without consequence. There can't be shaming. There can't be jibing or making fun of somebody for asking a question that seems trivial. If they're asking a question, it's not trivial. If they start thinking that questions are trivial or not taken seriously, they're going to stop asking, which means they're going to stop learning. You can have fun. You have to have fun while you're working, but there has to be a separation of when are we screwing around and when are we actually working and when are we actually training. You've got to be able to recognize wins and you've got to be able to recognize milestones. How do you define the milestones? There has to be an action plan, right? There has to be a goal. There has to be a guideline for what the standard is, what kind of advancement you want to see, what that timeline is, and then what the steps are to get there. Laying that out and then adhering to it can be immensely challenging. Now, there also has to be an expectation and understanding that while this technician is mentoring somebody, they're probably not going to be producing a lot, if anything. There's going to be a lot of, not necessarily hand-holding, but there has to be constant supervision. That mentor and that apprentice, especially early on, have to be pretty much attached at the hip, but the apprentice has to be allowed to do the work, make the mistakes, and learn and build the processes, build the habits, and develop and culture those instincts that allow them to recognize when something is going well, but more importantly, when it's not going well and what needs to happen to fix it. They can't be relied on to solve those problems entirely by themselves because they don't know. They don't have the experience, they don't have the backing to be able to recognize some of that stuff, and that's where our job is, or where our job becomes so important, is we have to be able to recognize when bad habits are forming and kick those over into good habits. There are no mistakes in training. There are coachable moments. There are teaching moments, but there are no mistakes. Any mistakes are the mentor. The apprentice is going to make bad decisions. He or she has to understand why those are bad decisions and why they can't be made and what the consequences can be. They also have to be allowed to make some of those bad decisions, make the mistakes, and then work back through where they went wrong and understand what the signs are to getting it wrong and how to arrest that and get it right. Again, these are all things that the mentor is responsible for with the apprentice. What is the apprentice responsible for? Well, the biggest thing for me, the apprentice has to have an internal drive and a work ethic. The apprentice has to be able to power through the mistakes, learn from those mistakes, understand what, why, and where things went wrong, and they have to be able to grow past that and understand what went south and then how to unsouth it, how to make it better, how to fix it, and better yet, how not to let it happen again. That apprentice has to be willing and able to take criticism and feedback. And if they don't understand feedback, they have to be willing to ask questions. As a mentor, you have to be ready to field all of those questions without any sort of chastising, without any sort of ball busting. There has to be a lot of discipline in that from the mentor. Again, none of us came into this knowing how to do it. We all had to learn. Some of us had easy roads to learning, some of us had hard roads to learning, and then you have guys like me who are going to make it a point to take the path of most resistance every time. Early on, I had a hell of an ego. I thought I was the shit. I'm past that. But for a while, I had to make some really stupid decisions, and I caused a lot of mentors to throw their hands up and say, this guy is never going to make it. Spite was a big motivator for me at some times because there were some guys that I trained under that were complete assholes. If I asked a question, why do you do this? Because that's how you do it. Yeah, but why? Because that's what you do. Why? I was looking for the reasoning, not because this is how I do it. Why do you do it that way? Being able to explain the steps and why you do them is really important to helping build an understanding, but at the end of the day, they have to believe in the mission, right? They have to believe in the philosophy of the shop. All shops are not going to work for all apprentices. Just like, an interview is a two-way street, so is an apprenticeship. Providing a safe environment for an apprentice to be able to learn and make mistakes and ask questions ad nauseum at times, to them, this is all new. To us, it isn't. To us, it's mundane, sometimes really boring. To them, it's all new. It's all exciting. It's all cool. and it's really overwhelming. We have a duty to recognize that and be patient and be vigilant. We have to be focused. We have to be gentle. We can be firm and assertive, but we have to be gentle about how hard we blow back on some of the questions that to us seem really stupid. You know, how important is it to put 0.20 in? Can I just throw 5.30 in it? I wouldn't expect that out of one of my more experienced guys, but someone coming in probably doesn't even know how oil is graded. They don't know what the numbers mean. So what do? Do you explain it to them, or do you tell them to go look it up and find the answers? I'll do a little bit of both. I'll give them a basic breakdown, and then I will encourage them or help them figure out where they can go to understand what it is. You know, I'm going to guide them to a point, but I'm going to let a lot of their questions be the guide. You know, that's going to help me understand what they know and what they don't know and what they're curious about. If they're curious, if they're interested, they're going to retain it. You know, if I have a guy who's really into diesel after treatment or into diesels, then we're going to focus on diesels. If I have a guy who's really into performance, then we're going to focus on how that applies to what we do. I learned a lot of drivability at the racetrack because I had to get the car going between rounds. So that was a crash course in drivability that worked out pretty well. It was very basic. It was very rudimentary. It probably would have made some people I work with now sick, the way I tested stuff, but you know what? It got the job done. It got me back on the track. It put more trophies in the case. Pressure is a great motivator, but we don't want to put so much pressure on our apprentices that they decide they hate this. You know, we have to keep it fun. We have to keep it light. We have to keep it entertaining, but we also have to keep it realistic. You know, building an actionable, measurable yardstick of their training progression, and then holding both parties to that, the mentor and the apprentice, and following that up and growing it and developing it and culturing is so important. You know, there's stuff that none of us like to do. Everybody's got something they hate doing on a vehicle, but it's something you have to do. Getting them through that and getting them to understand that, you know, it's still work. There are some things that just aren't fun to do, but they still have to be done. You know, one of my favorite things on the planet is getting covered in gear oil and or DEF, or both at the same time. But it's still part of the job. I still got to do it, you know, and sometimes that's what it is. This isn't all what you see on a Discovery Channel show about working in a shop or on Netflix or on TV. It gives kind of an unrealistic expectation. Trade schools are famous for giving horribly unrealistic expectations for what you can expect when you become a technician, when you enter the industry. That's something that all sides need to have realistic expectations for mentoring. It's a complex process. It's a time-consuming process. You're not going to have a competent trained tech for a couple of years. This is a relationship length commitment. You know, it's going to be at least 6 to 9 months before I even consider turning an apprentice loose for an oil change. Maybe less, but I'm still going to be over their shoulder early on. As they progress, they're going to let you know when they're okay to move on their own. You know, if you hand a guy a check engine light and he comes back with an accurate diagnosis, you can probably step it up a little bit. If you give a guy a misfire and he comes back saying purge valve, you need to tell him to put down Identifix and start over. But you have to be able to read when somebody is progressing and when they can move forward. And there's a lot to it. There's a lot of responsibility to it. There are a lot of challenges to it. You know, an effective mentor is going to be very supportive, but also very firm and rigid with the plan. You've got to stick with the plan, but you've got to be able to adapt that plan to the person. The ideal situation is that mentor and that apprentice are going to have a wide yardstick. They're going to have a long-term goal, right? Then you sit down with that apprentice and come up with a schedule of the baby steps you're going to take, but you're going to have milestones spaced out that they're going to have to hit. And if they don't hit them, do you cut them loose? Absolutely not. You figure out why they didn't hit them and what needs to change to make sure that the goals that we're setting are attainable. All right, but I know this is a little bit of a longer video, guys, but I appreciate you sticking around. If you like what you're seeing, like, subscribe, shoot me some comments, shoot me some feedback, hit me up on Facebook, hit me up on YouTube. We'll see you around next time. Have a great week.